The galactic hegemony had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Their empire stretched across 3 spiral arms, containing over 2,000 inhabited worlds and nearly 1 trillion souls. They had defeated every enemy, absorbed every rival, and brought order to the chaos of space. In all that time, they had never met a species they could not understand, predict, or control. Then they found the humans. The first contact happened near the edge of explored space. A hegemony scout vessel detected radio signals coming from a small yellow star. The signals were crude, unencrypted, broadcasting music and voices into the void like a child shouting into the darkness. The scout captain, a Vraxian named Kethros, followed the signals to their source and found a small blue planet teeming with life. Kethros spent 3 months observing from orbit. He watched the humans go about their lives. He saw their cities, their vehicles, their primitive spacecraft that could barely reach their own moon. He recorded everything and sent his report back to the hegemony's Supreme Council. The assessment was not kind. Humans were weak. They had no natural weapons, no claws or fangs or venom. Their skin was soft and easily damaged. They could not see in the dark or hear frequencies beyond a narrow range. They needed to sleep for 8 hours every day, leaving them vulnerable for 1/3 of their lives. They could not survive in vacuum, in extreme heat, or in extreme cold without artificial protection. Their technology was primitive. They still used chemical rockets to reach space. Their weapons relied on simple kinetic force or crude explosives. They had no energy shields, no faster-than-light travel, no artificial gravity. By hegemony standards, they were barely past the Stone Age. The Supreme Council debated what to do with this new species for several years. Some wanted to make contact and offer membership in the hegemony. Others wanted to simply observe and wait. A few suggested eliminating the humans before they could become a threat, but this was considered excessive for such a primitive species. In the end, they decided to do nothing. Humans were too weak to matter. They would either destroy themselves or eventually crawl out into space, at which point they could be dealt with. The hegemony had more important concerns. 50 years passed. In that time, humans had spread beyond their home planet. They built colonies on the moons of their outer planets and established mining operations in their asteroid belt. They were still primitive by hegemony standards, but they were growing faster than anyone had expected. The Vraxian Dominion, a client state of the hegemony, controlled the territory nearest to human space. The Vraxians were a proud species, with thick scales and powerful builds. They had served the hegemony as soldiers and enforcers for 3,000 years. When human mining ships began operating near the border of Vraxian territory, the Dominion decided to send a message. They called it a disciplinary incursion. 300 Vraxian warriors, equipped with the best weapons the hegemony could provide, descended on a human mining colony called New Brisbane. The colony had a population of 12,000. They had no military presence, only a small security force equipped with basic firearms. The Vraxians expected the humans to surrender immediately. Any rational species would. The Vraxians were bigger, stronger, better armed, and vastly more experienced in warfare. Resistance was pointless. The humans did not surrender. The first Vraxian squad to enter the colony's main habitat found themselves under fire from positions they could not see. The humans had hidden themselves in maintenance shafts, behind cargo containers, inside ventilation ducts. They fought with mining tools, with improvised explosives, with anything they could find. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, they fought with their hands. Commander Vrexel, leading the Vraxian forces, was confused. He had fought many species in his long career. He had seen fear. He had seen desperation. He had seen the moment when an enemy realized they could not win and gave up. He did not see that moment in the humans. Instead, he saw something else. He saw humans who knew they were going to die, choosing to fight anyway. He saw wounded humans crawling toward enemy positions with grenades in their hands. He saw civilians, people who had never held a weapon before, picking up the guns of fallen defenders and joining the battle. The Vraxians won, eventually. They had to. Their technology was simply too advanced, their numbers too great. After 3 weeks of fighting, the colony fell, but the cost was staggering. Over 100 Vraxian warriors were dead. Another 50 were wounded so badly they would never fight again. 100 deaths for a colony of miners. Commander Vrexel could not understand it. He interrogated the surviving humans, trying to make sense of what had happened. One of them, a woman named Sarah Chen, had been a teacher before the invasion. She had killed 2 Vraxian soldiers with a mining laser before being captured. "Why did you fight?" Vrexel asked her. "You knew you could not win. Why did you not surrender?" Sarah looked at him with eyes that held no fear. "Because it was our home," she said. "Because those were our people. Because surrender was not an option. But you died for nothing. Your resistance achieved nothing." Sarah smiled, and Vrexel felt a chill run down his scaled spine. "We made you bleed," she said. "We showed you that humans don't give up. And now you know that every human colony you attack will cost you. Every single one." Vrexel filed his report with the Hegemony's Military Assessment Division. He warned them that humans were more dangerous than they appeared. He wrote that their will to fight was unlike anything he had ever seen. He recommended that the Hegemony take humans seriously as a potential threat. The Supreme Council read his report and dismissed it. The Vraxians had won, had they not. 100 casualties was regrettable, but acceptable. The humans had shown spirit, yes. But spirit could not defeat superior technology and numbers. They added a note to humanity's file. Tenacious but limited. No significant threat. Continue observation. They did not ask the obvious question. They did not wonder why, if humans fought so fiercely, Earth's governments had not sent help. They did not ask where the human military was, or why it had not responded to the attack on New Brisbane. If they had asked, they might have learned the truth. The colonists who had fought and died were not soldiers. They were miners, teachers, engineers, and farmers. They were ordinary people who had picked up weapons to defend their homes. Earth's actual military had never been deployed. The governments of Earth had decided that a few mining colonies were not worth starting an interstellar war over. The Vraxians had faced humanity's civilians. They had no idea what humanity's soldiers were capable of. 20 years had passed since the fall of New Brisbane. In that time, the Hegemony had decided that humans needed to be brought under control. Not destroyed, of course. Destruction was wasteful, and humans had proven themselves useful for certain tasks. Instead, the Supreme Council offered humanity a choice: join the Hegemony as a labor species, or face the full might of 1,000 worlds. Earth's governments looked at their small fleet of ships, their handful of colonies, their weapons that could barely scratch Hegemony armor. They looked at the endless armadas of the Empire that ruled the galaxy, and they signed the Treaty of Concessions. Under the treaty, humans became the lowest class of citizens in the Hegemony. They were not slaves. Technically, they received payment for their work. They could own property. They had certain legal protections. But they were given the jobs that no other species wanted. They worked in the deep asteroid mines where radiation was high and accidents were common. They served on cargo ships that traveled through dangerous space. They built structures on worlds with crushing gravity or toxic atmospheres. The Hegemony expected humans to wither under these conditions. Other species certainly would have. The Villani, a delicate species from the inner worlds, could barely survive a standard work cycle in the mines. The Threx, despite their great strength, suffered mental breakdowns when isolated in deep space. Every species had its limits. Humans, it seemed, did not. Ambassador Yeltrix of the Cultural Assessment Division was assigned to study humanity more closely. She was a Corvani, a species known for their analytical minds and attention to detail. Her job was to understand how different species thought, what motivated them, and how they could be best utilized by the Hegemony. She had studied over 40 species in her career. None had prepared her for humans. She began her research on a mining station in the Outer Territories, a place called Shaft 7. The station was carved into the heart of an asteroid, a dark and cramped place where humans worked 12-hour shifts, extracting rare metals. The conditions were terrible. The air was thin, the gravity was wrong, and the constant drilling made the walls shake. Most species would have gone mad within a month. The humans had been there for 3 years. They had turned the place into a home. Yeltrix watched them in amazement. They had decorated their quarters with pictures and small items from Earth. They had created a common area where they gathered after shifts to talk and laugh and share meals. They had invented games to play in the low gravity, competitions that had no purpose except to pass the time. They had even started a small garden, growing plants under artificial lights just to have something green to look at. She interviewed a human named Marcus Webb, a miner who had been on Shaft 7 since it opened. He was 40 years old, with gray in his hair and scars on his hands from years of dangerous work. By human standards, he was not remarkable. By Yeltrix's standards, he was fascinating. "How do you endure this?" she asked him. "The isolation, the danger, the conditions. How do you stay sane?" Marcus shrugged. "You get used to it," he said. "Besides, it's not so bad. The pay is decent, the food is okay, and I've got friends here. We look out for each other. But you could die at any moment. A cave-in, an equipment failure, a radiation leak. Does that not frighten you?" "Sure. It's scary sometimes. But what's the alternative? Sit around feeling sorry for myself? That doesn't help anyone." He smiled at her. "We're humans, Ambassador. We adapt. It's what we do." Yeltrix spent 6 months on Shaft 7, and in that time, she learned more about humans than 20 years of hegemony reports had revealed. She learned that they were social creatures who formed strong bonds quickly. She learned that they used humor to cope with stress and tragedy. She learned that they could find hope in the darkest circumstances, and she learned something that troubled her deeply. One evening, she was sharing a meal with a group of human workers when the conversation turned to the Vraxian incursion, the attack on New Brisbane that had led to the Treaty of Concessions. The humans spoke of it with a mixture of pride and sadness. They told stories about the colonists who had fought back, who had died defending their homes. "It was brave," Yeltrix said carefully, "but ultimately pointless. You lost." A woman named Priya Sharma shook her head. "We didn't lose," she said. "The colonists lost. There's a difference. I do not understand." Priya exchanged looks with the other humans. There was something in their eyes, something that Yeltrix could not read. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Ambassador, the people who fought at New Brisbane were civilians. Farmers, miners, teachers. They'd never been trained to fight. They just grabbed whatever weapons they could find and did their best." He paused. Earth's military never got involved. Yeltrix felt a chill run through her body. Why not? Politics, mostly. The governments decided it wasn't worth escalating. New Brisbane was a small colony, way out on the edge of nowhere. Starting a war with the hegemony over a mining outpost didn't make sense. Marcus took a drink from his cup. So they signed the treaty instead. "You mean?" Yeltrix struggled to process this information. "The soldiers who fought the Vraxians were not your military? Not even close. Then where is your military now?" Marcus smiled, and there was something sad in it. "Still on Earth, mostly. Still training, still waiting." He leaned forward. "Ambassador, you have to understand something. What the Vraxians fought at New Brisbane, that was just regular people doing their best. Our actual military, the professional soldiers who spend their whole lives learning how to fight, they never fired a shot." Yeltrix returned to her quarters that night and could not sleep. She kept thinking about what Marcus had told her. She kept remembering the reports from New Brisbane, the Vraxian casualties, the desperate fighting that had lasted 3 weeks. If those were just civilians, she thought, what are their soldiers like? She filed a classified report with the Supreme Council, outlining her concerns. She wrote that humans were far more capable than the hegemony understood. She warned that the Treaty of Concessions might have been a mistake, that it might have given humanity a reason to resent the hegemony while hiding their true strength. The Council read her report and filed it away. They had more pressing concerns. Tensions were rising in the outer territories. A species called the Helix were making aggressive movements near hegemony borders. There were rumors of rebellion. Humanity would have to wait. Yeltrix returned to her work, studying other species, writing other reports. But she never forgot what she had learned on Shaft 7. She never forgot the look in Marcus Webb's eyes when he talked about Earth's military. She had seen many things in her long career. She had seen arrogance and fear and desperation in countless species. What she had seen in Marcus's eyes was something different. It was patience. The patience of a species that was waiting for something, waiting for the right moment. Yeltrix did not know what that moment would be. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that when it came, the galaxy would never be the same. The Helix had been slaves of the hegemony for 800 years. They were insectoid beings, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with 6 limbs and natural armor that could stop most projectile weapons. Their ancestors had been bred for war by an ancient empire, modified over generations to become perfect soldiers. When the hegemony conquered their homeworld, they had been put to use as shock troops, the first wave in any battle. For 8 centuries, the Keelix had obeyed. They had fought and died in countless wars, always serving their masters, always following orders. But hatred had been growing in their hearts, passed down from generation to generation like a disease. And finally, that hatred had found a leader. War Queen Zeltrix united the scattered Keelix legions in secret. She spent decades planning, gathering weapons, building alliances with other oppressed species. And when she was ready, she struck. The rebellion began on a single night. Across 50 worlds, Keelix forces turned on their hegemony commanders. Military bases burned. Fleets were captured. Governors were executed. By the time the Supreme Council understood what was happening, 3 entire sectors had fallen. The hegemony responded with overwhelming force, as they always did. They sent their greatest fleets, their most experienced commanders, their most advanced weapons. They expected to crush the rebellion within months. They were wrong. The Keelix had learned from 8 centuries of serving the hegemony. They knew every tactic, every weakness, every flaw in their former masters' strategies. They fought with a ferocity born of generations of hatred, and they did not fear death. For every Keelix that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. Within a year, the rebellion had spread to 12 sectors. Within 2 years, hegemony forces were in full retreat. Worlds that had been loyal for thousands of years were falling to the Keelix advance. The Supreme Council, for the first time in their long history, faced the possibility of defeat. In their desperation, they made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. They went to the humans. The message arrived on Earth on a Tuesday morning. It was addressed to the United Earth Council, and it came from the Supreme Council itself. The hegemony, after 20 years of treating humans as a labor species, was asking for help. The terms were simple. If humanity agreed to fight against the Keelix, the Treaty of Concessions would be cancelled. Human colonies would be returned. Human citizens would be granted full rights within the hegemony. Earth would have a seat on the Supreme Council itself. In exchange, humans would go to war. The debate in the council chambers lasted 3 days. Some argued that humans should refuse, that the hegemony deserved to fall for how they had treated humanity. Others pointed out that the Keelix were unlikely to be better masters than the hegemony. In the end, the vote was close, but the decision was clear. Earth would fight. The first human forces arrived at the front lines 6 weeks later. Supreme Commander Threxus of the hegemony was there to meet them, along with his staff of officers and advisors. They watched the human ships emerge from faster-than-light travel, and they tried to hide their disappointment. The human fleet was small by hegemony standards. 200 ships, most of them barely larger than hegemony patrol vessels. Their weapons seemed primitive, their armor thin, their numbers insignificant compared to the vast Keelix armadas they would face. "This is what humanity sends?" one of Threxus's advisors muttered. "We are doomed." Threxus said nothing. He had read the reports from New Brisbane. He knew that humans were more than they appeared. But even he was not prepared for what came next. The human commander was a woman named General Catherine Shaw. She was 50 years old, with short gray hair and a face that seemed carved from stone. She had spent her entire adult life in Earth's military, training for a war that had never come. "Until now, General Shaw," Threxus said formally. "I am Supreme Commander Threxus. I command all hegemony forces in this sector. I will be coordinating your deployment to the front lines." Shaw looked at him with eyes that revealed nothing. "No," she said simply. "I beg your pardon. Human forces will operate independently. We'll coordinate with your intelligence division, but we won't be taking orders from Hegemony Command." She pulled out a data pad. "Here is our proposed area of operations. We'll begin offensive actions within 48 hours. Threxus stared at her. In 12,000 years, no species had ever spoken to a hegemony commander this way. "General, I must insist. With respect, Supreme Commander, you asked us to fight. This is how we fight." Shaw turned to leave, then paused. "Your forces should stay clear of our operational areas. Things are going to get messy, and we wouldn't want any friendly fire incidents." She left without waiting for a response. Threxus watched her go, unsure whether to be offended or impressed. He turned to his advisors. "Monitor their operations closely," he ordered. "I want to know exactly what these humans are capable of." He would find out soon enough. The human offensive began at dawn on the third day. 200 human ships moved against a Helix force of over 1,000, defending a planet called Vareth 4. The Helix commander, a veteran of 50 battles, was not concerned. He had faced worse odds and won. What happened next would become legend throughout the galaxy. The human ships did not attack directly, as hegemony forces would have. Instead, they split into dozens of small groups, hitting the Helix fleet from multiple directions at once. Their weapons, which had seemed primitive from a distance, proved to be something else entirely. Kinetic accelerators that fired projectiles at speeds the Helix had never seen, missiles that seemed to think for themselves, hunting down targets with terrible intelligence. But it was not the weapons that broke the Helix. It was the humans themselves. They fought with a coordination that seemed impossible. Every ship knew exactly where it needed to be, exactly when to fire, exactly when to fall back. They used their small size to slip through gaps in the Helix formation, striking at weak points with surgical precision. They sacrificed ships to protect each other, trusting that their comrades would use the opportunity to strike. And when Helix warriors boarded human vessels, expecting easy victories in close combat, they found something they had never encountered before: human soldiers. These were not miners with improvised weapons. These were men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment. They wore armor that enhanced their strength and speed. They carried weapons designed specifically to penetrate Helix's natural defenses. And they fought with a controlled fury that made the Helix seem clumsy by comparison. The battle lasted 8 hours. When it was over, the Helix fleet had been destroyed. Not defeated, not driven back. Destroyed. 600 ships reduced to debris, with only a handful escaping to carry word of the disaster. Human losses were 22 ships. Threxus received the report in stunned silence. His advisors looked at each other, unable to speak. Finally, one of them found his voice. "Supreme Commander, the humans." "I know," Threxus said quietly. "They won. Against a force 5 times their size. They won." "I know. How is that possible?" Threxus thought of the reports from New Brisbane, of the civilians who had held off Vraxian warriors for 3 weeks. He thought of what General Shaw had said. "This is how we fight." "I don't know," he admitted. "But I suspect we are about to find out." He was right. And the truth would terrify him more than any Helix army ever could. The war against the Helix lasted 18 months. In that time, human forces fought in over 200 engagements, winning all but a handful. They pushed the Helix back sector by sector, world by world, until the War Queen herself was forced to sue for peace. The rebellion that had threatened to destroy the hegemony ended not with a hegemony victory, but with a human one. The Supreme Council honored their agreement. Human colonies were returned. Full citizenship was granted. Earth received its seat on the Council, and for the first time in hegemony history, a species that had been conquered was treated as an equal. But the Council members who voted for these measures did so with fear in their hearts. They had watched the human campaigns. They had seen the reports, and they had questions that kept them awake at night. They sent a delegation to Earth to find answers. The delegation was led by historian Prime Vorath, the hegemony's most respected scholar. He had spent his life studying the civilizations of the galaxy, understanding how they rose and fell, what made them strong and what made them weak. He had studied over 1,000 species. He believed he understood war. He did not understand humans. Earth surprised him from the moment his ship entered orbit. He had expected a planet scarred by conflict, like so many worlds he had seen. Instead, he found a world of stunning beauty. Blue oceans, green forests, white clouds drifting across a vibrant sky, and cities, millions of cities, home to billions of people living in relative peace. "This is your homeworld?" he asked his human guide, a young officer named Lieutenant James Park. "Where are the scars, the wastelands, the monuments to your fallen?" Lieutenant Park smiled sadly. "Oh, they're there, Historian Prime. You just have to know where to look." Vorath spent 3 months on Earth, and in that time, he discovered the truth about humanity. It was not a truth that could be understood quickly. It had to be absorbed, slowly, piece by piece, until the full picture became clear. He started with the archives. The archives of Earth contained the complete history of human civilization, from the earliest writings to the present day. Vorath began reading, expecting to find a story similar to other species. Early tribal conflicts, gradual unification, eventual peace. That was the pattern. That was how civilizations developed. Humans had not followed the pattern. The first records he found were of something called the Bronze Age collapse, a period when multiple human civilizations had destroyed each other simultaneously. Then came the wars of ancient empires: Persia, Rome, China, Mongolia. Each conflict was larger than the last, each more devastating than the one before. Vorath read faster, hoping to find the turning point, the moment when humans had put aside their conflicts and united. Instead, he found the opposite. The conflicts grew. The weapons improved. The death tolls mounted. He found records of something called the 30 Years' War, which had killed 8 million people. Then the Napoleonic Wars, which had killed 6 million more. Then something called World War I, which had killed 20 million. And then, Vorath stopped reading. He sat in silence for a long time, trying to process what he had seen. "Historian Prime?" Lieutenant Park asked. "Is something wrong? This cannot be accurate," Vorath said quietly. "These numbers cannot be real." "Which number, sir?" "World War II. 60 million dead. How is that possible? How could any species lose 60 million of its own people in a single conflict and survive?" Park's expression grew somber. "We almost didn't," he said. "That war broke something in us. It showed us what we were capable of, and it terrified us. After it was over, we tried to build systems to prevent it from happening again. The United Nations, international law, arms control treaties." He paused. "We were not entirely successful. There were more wars after that, many more. Smaller ones mostly, but yes. We could never quite stop fighting each other. It's in our nature, I think. The will to fight, to compete, to dominate. It's hard to get rid of." Vorath returned to the archives, but now he read with different eyes. He read about the nuclear weapons that humans had created, bombs that could destroy entire cities in a single flash. He read about the Cold War, a conflict where two groups of humans had pointed thousands of these weapons at each other for decades. He read about biological weapons, chemical weapons, weapons so terrible that humans had agreed never to use them. And then he read about something that finally broke his understanding of the universe. He read about the rules of war. Humans, who had spent their entire existence fighting each other, had developed laws to limit how they fought. They had created concepts like war crimes and crimes against humanity. They had built courts to punish those who violated these rules. They had agreed, as a species, that certain things were too terrible to do even to enemies. Vorath read the Geneva Conventions, line by line, and felt his mind struggling to accept what he was seeing. Protections for prisoners, prohibitions against torture, requirements to care for wounded enemies, rules about targeting civilians. Humans had created rules for how to kill each other more humanely. He called Lieutenant Park back to his quarters. "I need to understand something," he said. "Your species created weapons capable of destroying your entire planet. You fought wars that killed millions. And yet, you also created these rules, these laws that limit what you can do in war. Why?" Park thought for a moment before answering. "Because we know what we are," he said finally. "We know what we're capable of. We've seen it. We've lived it. And we decided that there had to be limits, that some things were wrong, no matter the circumstances. That victory wasn't worth it if it meant becoming monsters. But you fought the Helix without following those rules. I saw the reports. Your forces were brutal, efficient, merciless." "No," Park said firmly. "We followed every rule of engagement we have. Every one. We took prisoners when possible. We avoided civilian targets. We offered surrender terms before every major battle." He met Vorath's eyes. "Historian Prime, you have to understand something. What you saw us do to the Helix, that was us holding back." Vorath stared at him. "Holding back? Our rules of engagement are strict. Our soldiers are trained to use minimum necessary force. The weapons we deployed against the Helix were conventional. By our standards, we have worse. Much worse. But we chose not to use them. Vorath thought about the Helix fleets that had been destroyed, the worlds that had been taken, the rebellion that had threatened to tear the hegemony apart, ended in 18 months by a species that had been mining asteroids 2 years earlier. If what you deployed against the Helix was conventional, he said slowly, then what are your strongest weapons? Park was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. You don't want to know. Vorath sent a message to the Supreme Council that night. It was brief, because he did not have words for what he had learned. He simply wrote, "We have made a terrible mistake. Humans have been fighting each other for their entire existence. They have weapons we cannot imagine. And they have been holding back. All of them. Always." The council received his message and did not know what to do with it. For the first time in 12,000 years, they were afraid. The truth about humanity spread through the hegemony like fire through dry grass. Vorath's report was classified, but secrets never stay secret for long. Within months, every species in the Empire knew what the humans were capable of, and they were terrified. The Vraxians, who had once looked down on humans as weak primitives, now avoided them entirely. The Corvani, known for their analytical detachment, began studying human history with something close to obsession. The Threx, the Villani, the Morathi, and 100 other species all reacted the same way. They had lived alongside a predator without knowing it, and now they could not stop looking at its teeth. The Supreme Council called an emergency session. Representatives from every major species attended, their faces showing various degrees of fear, anger, and confusion. At the center of the chamber, standing alone, was the human ambassador. Her name was Elizabeth Okafor. She was 62 years old, a former soldier who had served in 3 wars before becoming a diplomat. She had gray hair, dark skin, and eyes that had seen too much death to be intimidated by politicians. The council speaker, an ancient Corvani named Telrath, addressed her directly. Ambassador Okafor, this council has questions about your species, questions that demand honest answers. I'll do my best, Okafor said calmly. Our intelligence services have compiled a report on human capabilities. I will share some of its contents. Telrath activated a display screen behind him. Humans can pursue prey for days without stopping, running until their targets collapse from exhaustion. No other known species possesses this ability. That's true, Okafor said. It's how our ancestors hunted, long ago. We call it persistence hunting. Humans can survive injuries that would kill most sentient beings. Loss of limbs, severe organ damage, wounds that expose internal structures. Humans recover from these injuries and continue functioning. Also true, our bodies are resilient. Humans can digest foods that are toxic to most life forms. You can survive in temperature ranges that would incapacitate other species. Your immune systems can adapt to diseases that would devastate entire planets. Okafor nodded. We evolved on a dangerous world. We had to be tough to survive. Telrath's voice grew harder. And your weapons, Ambassador. The weapons you have used on each other throughout your history. Nuclear devices that can destroy cities. Biological agents that can wipe out populations. Chemical weapons that cause death in the most painful ways imaginable. Yes, you have these weapons still? Yes. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Telrath raised a hand for silence. And yet, in your war against the Helix, you did not use them. Why? Okafor took a deep breath before answering. Because we didn't need to, and because we chose not to. Chose not to? What does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. We have rules, Speaker. Rules we created for ourselves, to limit what we do in war. We agreed, as a species, that some weapons are too terrible to use. We locked them away and promised each other we would never bring them out again. She paused. The forces we sent against the Helix operated under strict rules of engagement. They used conventional weapons only. They took prisoners when possible. They avoided civilian targets. They followed every law of war that humanity has developed. And if they had not followed those rules? Telrath asked. If you had used your full capabilities? Okafor met his eyes. The Helix would be extinct. Their worlds would be ash. The war would have lasted weeks, not months. Her voice was steady, without pride or shame. We could have done it. We chose not to. The chamber was silent. A Vraxian counselor stood. Why should we believe this? Why should we believe that your species, which has spent its entire history at war, would suddenly develop a conscience? Okafor turned to face him. Because we know what we are, she said. We have looked into the mirror and seen the monster that lives inside us. We have watched ourselves commit atrocities that would make your worst nightmares seem pleasant. We have stood at the edge of extinction, our fingers on buttons that could have ended everything. And we stepped back. She walked toward the center of the chamber, her voice growing stronger. You want to know what humanity's greatest strength is? It's not our endurance, or our resilience, or our weapons. It's our choice. Every day, every moment, we choose not to become the monsters we could be. Every human soldier who shows mercy to a fallen enemy. Every commander who holds fire when they could destroy. Every government that chooses negotiation over annihilation. That is humanity at its strongest. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from 100 worlds. The colonists at New Brisbane, they were farmers and miners fighting with improvised weapons. They could have surrendered, but they chose to fight. The soldiers who defeated the Keelix, they could have used weapons that would have ended the war in days. But they chose restraint. They chose to follow rules that made their job harder, because those rules mattered. And what happens? Telrath asked quietly. If you ever choose differently. Okafor was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Then I hope I never see that day. Because you won't be the only ones destroyed. We will destroy ourselves too. We came too close, once. We built enough nuclear weapons to kill every human being 100 times over. And we pointed them at each other for 50 years. We lived in fear of ourselves, of what we might do if someone made the wrong decision, pushed the wrong button. She returned to her place before the council. That fear never left us. It's why we have our rules, our laws, our limits. It's why we hold ourselves to a higher standard than any other species. Because we know, better than anyone, what happens when we don't. The chamber remained silent. Finally, Telrath spoke. Ambassador Okafor, this council must decide how to proceed. Your species has proven itself valuable in war, but you have also proven yourself dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous species in the galaxy. How can we trust you? Okafor smiled sadly. You can't. Not completely. We're human. We're flawed. We make mistakes. We give in to anger. We sometimes fail to live up to our ideals. But we try. Every day, we try to be better than we were yesterday. That's all we can offer you. Our effort. Our choice. Our constant, exhausting effort to be worthy of the universe that made us. She took a step forward. Be grateful, she said, that when your Vraxians burned our colonies, we chose not to respond in kind. Be grateful that when we had the power to destroy the Keelix utterly, we chose mercy instead. Be grateful that we have spent generations building systems to control ourselves, to limit our worst impulses, to channel our aggression into something productive. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Be grateful that we decided, a long time ago, that we didn't want to be monsters. Because if we ever change our minds, there isn't a force in this galaxy that could stop us. The Supreme Council said nothing. 12,000 years they had ruled. They had defeated every enemy, absorbed every rival, brought order to the chaos of space. And now they sat in silence, looking at a single human woman, and they were afraid, not of what she might do, but of what her species had chosen not to do. The session ended without a formal decision. The council members filed out quietly, lost in their own thoughts. Ambassador Okafor watched them go, then turned to leave herself. At the door, she paused and looked back at the empty chamber. We're not the heroes of this story, she said softly. To no one. We're just people, trying to be better than our past, trying to earn a future we almost threw away. She walked out into the light of an alien sun, leaving the hegemony to wrestle with a truth they had never imagined. Humanity was not their enemy. Humanity was simply human, and that was the most terrifying thing of all.